The sun had just disappeared behind the hills. The sunset painting, the cracked earth in crimson hues. As John, the solitary farmer, was locking the gate, a soft knock echoed. At the door stood a gray-skinned girl with shimmering yellow eyes, cradling two mud-covered children, whispering, "I will work in your field, Earthling. Just give my children something to eat." John stared at the strange trio before him, his weathered hands gripping the gate. The woman's gray skin bore luminescent markings that seemed to pulse in the dimming light. Her yellow eyes, though alien, held a familiar desperation he recognized all too well. "Please," she added, her voice barely above a whisper. One of the children whimpered, a sound that cut through John's hesitation like a blade through butter. He glanced around nervously, scanning the dusty horizon. No one else was in sight, just the endless fields stretching toward the hills where his farm bordered the wilderness. His mind raced with warnings. Outsiders meant trouble, especially alien outsiders. The war might have ended a decade ago, but memories lingered like fresh wounds in these parts. "Come in," he said finally, the words surprising even himself. "But stay out of sight." Relief washed over the woman's face as John stepped aside, allowing them entry. The children clung to her tattered clothing, their own gray skin caked with the dust of what must have been a long journey. John closed the gate behind them, securing the latch with trembling fingers. The wooden farmhouse stood weathered but sturdy, a testament to generations of his family's perseverance. Inside, the simple furnishings spoke of a solitary life: a single chair by the hearth, a narrow bed in the corner, shelves stocked with preserved foods that would have to last until harvest. "You can sit," John said awkwardly, gesturing to the table. "I'll heat some soup." The woman remained standing, her posture rigid with caution. "My name is Sina," she offered quietly, her accent strange yet understandable. "These are my children." John nodded without introducing himself, busying his hands with the iron pot. The silence grew between them, broken only by the crackling fire and the occasional whimper from the smaller child. As the vegetable soup warmed, John stole glances at his unexpected guests. The children's eyes darted around the room, taking in every detail with a combination of fear and wonder. They couldn't have been older than 7 or 8, though John knew little about alien aging. The smaller one's stomach growled audibly, prompting Sina to tighten her embrace. "Sit," John repeated, this time with more force. "You need to eat." Hesitantly, Sina guided her children to the bench. When John placed the steaming bowls before them, the children looked to their mother, waiting. It was only after Sina nodded that they began to eat, their small hands trembling as they lifted the spoons to their mouths. "You said you would work," John said, watching them from across the table. "What can you do?" Sina looked up, her yellow eyes meeting his. "Anything," she answered simply. "I am strong. I learn quickly." John considered her words. His fields were suffering from the drought, and harvest was approaching. He had been managing alone since his parents passed, and the work was becoming too much for a single pair of hands. Still, harboring aliens, especially in this climate of suspicion, was dangerous. "There's a shed out back," he said finally. "You can sleep there tonight. We'll see about work in the morning." That night, John lay awake in his bed, listening to the wind whistling through the cracks in the walls. What had he done? The village would be furious if they discovered he was sheltering aliens. He could lose everything: his standing, his farm, perhaps even his life. Yet the memory of those hungry children kept him from marching out to the shed and sending them away. His wife and daughter had died 5 years ago during a fever that swept through the region. Since then, the emptiness of the house had grown into something almost tangible. Tonight, somehow, it felt less overwhelming. As dawn broke, John rose and stepped outside, half expecting to find the shed empty and some of his valuables missing. Instead, he found Sina already at work, sweeping the yard with a makeshift broom fashioned from bound straw. The children were helping her, gathering small stones and placing them in a neat pile by the fence. "You're up early," John remarked, surprised. Sina straightened, a wariness in her stance. "I said I would work." "So you did." John nodded toward the house. "There's bread inside. Get something to eat. Then I'll show you what needs doing." Throughout the morning, John guided Sina through the basic chores, feeding the chickens, checking the irrigation channels, sorting seeds for the next planting. She worked methodically, her movements becoming more confident with each task completed. The children followed in her wake, quiet but observant, occasionally helping with simpler tasks. By midday, John was impressed despite himself. Sina worked harder than any farmhand he'd hired in the past, never complaining about the heat or the repetitive nature of the tasks. Her alien physiology seemed well suited to the harsh conditions, her gray skin less susceptible to the scorching sun. "You need to go to the village for supplies," John told her, as they paused for a simple lunch of bread and cheese. "But it's not safe for you to be seen." Sina nodded, understanding immediately. "The village does not welcome our kind." "No," John admitted. "The war left scars. People are afraid." "Fear makes humans dangerous," Sina observed quietly. "It is the same with my people." John considered her words. "I'll go tomorrow. Make a list of what you need." Sina hesitated. "My children need clothes, clean water, perhaps some flour. I can make bread." "You can bake?" John asked, surprised. A small smile touched Sina's lips, the first he'd seen. "No, but I can learn." The next morning, John hitched his old horse to the cart and set off for the village. The journey took nearly 2 hours, the rutted road winding through fields parched by weeks without rain. As the cluster of stone and wooden buildings came into view, John felt a familiar tension settle in his shoulders. He had never been comfortable in crowds, preferring the solitude of his farm. After losing his family, his visits to the village had become increasingly rare. The general store was run by Martha, a widow whose husband had been killed in the alien wars. She greeted John with surprise. "Twice in 1 month? This must be some kind of record," she teased, though her smile was genuine. "Need supplies," John mumbled, handing her a list. "Drought's getting worse." Martha's eyes scanned the paper. "Flour, children's clothing, extra soap." Her eyebrow raised. "You expecting company, John?" John kept his expression neutral. "Just stocking up. Never know when the roads might wash out if the rains ever come." Martha seemed unconvinced, but began gathering his items without further questioning. John browsed the store while waiting, listening to the conversations around him. Most centered on the drought and fears of a poor harvest, but a few mentioned disturbing rumors. "Heard there's been alien sightings up north," a gruff voice said. "Whole family of them, trying to pass as travelers. Army should have wiped them all out when they had the chance," another replied. "Can't trust any of them, no matter what the peace treaty says." John felt his pulse quicken, but kept his head down. When Martha finished his order, he paid quickly and loaded his purchases into the cart. Before leaving, he made one last stop at the mill, where old Merrick sold flour and grain. "Buying more than usual," Merrick noted, his aged eyes sharp beneath bushy eyebrows. "Field's doing better than you let on." "No," John replied honestly, "but I'm hoping to make it through winter without coming back here too often." Merrick laughed, a dry sound like rustling leaves. "Still the hermit, eh? Well, can't say I blame you these days. Town's full of nothing but fear and gossip." John nodded non-committally and added a bag of wheat seeds to his purchase. "Any news worth knowing?" "Mayor's formed a security committee," Merrick said, lowering his voice. "Red scarves as their badge. Say they're protecting us from alien infiltrators." He shook his head. Bunch of bullies looking for an excuse, if you ask me. With a word of thanks, John finished his business and headed home, his mind troubled by what he'd heard. The formation of vigilante groups was a bad sign. If Sina and her children were discovered, they wouldn't receive a fair hearing. When he returned to the farm, John found the yard swept clean, the chicken coop repaired, and a small vegetable garden weeded. Sina emerged from the house, wiping her hands on a rag. "The roof was leaking," she explained. "I found some clay and sealed it." John unloaded the supplies, including the clothing for the children and the flour Sina had requested. Her eyes widened at the quantity. "This is too much," she protested. "You said you wanted to learn to bake," John replied. "Might as well have enough to practice with." Over the next days, a routine developed. John taught Sina the work of the farm, how to test soil moisture, when to water the struggling wheat fields, which wild plants were edible supplements in lean times. Sina proved an apt pupil, her alien dexterity sometimes giving her advantages in delicate tasks. The children, whom John learned were named Mira and Leo, gradually became less shy, occasionally following him around the farm and asking questions about earth plants and animals. In the evenings, Sina experimented with baking, creating flatbreads that were surprisingly delicious despite their unusual appearance. John found himself looking forward to the shared meals. The silence of his home, now filled with quiet conversation and the occasional laughter of the children. But the idyll couldn't last. A week after Sina's arrival, John spotted dust on the horizon, riders approaching from the direction of the village. He rushed to the fields where Sina was working. "People coming," he warned tersely. "Hide in the cellar, quickly." Sina dropped her tools without question, gathering her children and hurrying to the concealed cellar door John had shown them as an emergency refuge. They had barely disappeared inside when 3 men on horseback arrived at the gate. John recognized them immediately by the red scarves around their necks. Merrick's security committee. Their leader was Brock, a burly man who had lost 2 brothers in the alien wars. "John," Brock called out, not bothering to dismount. "Been hearing strange stories about your farm." John approached slowly, wiping his hands on his pants. "What kind of stories?" "Martha says you bought children's clothing. Old Merrick mentioned extra supplies." Brock's eyes narrowed. "And some folks passing by claim they saw a gray-skinned woman working your fields." "People see what they want to see," John replied evenly. "Drought's got everyone imagining things." Brock dismounted, his companions following suit. All 3 men were armed with the standard-issue blasters from the war. "You wouldn't be harboring aliens, would you, John?" Brock asked, his voice dangerously soft. "Because that would be a violation of village security protocols." "There are no official protocols," John said. "Just your committee's rules." "Rules that keep us safe," one of the other men spat. "Or have you forgotten what those creatures did during the war?" John stood his ground. "The war's been over for 10 years. Treaty says they have the right to live peacefully." "Treaty," Brock scoffed. "Written by politicians who never saw their families slaughtered." He stepped closer to John. "We're going to search your property." "No," John said firmly. "This is my land. You have no authority here." The tension thickened as the men exchanged glances. John knew he was outnumbered and outarmed, but the thought of them discovering Sina and her children made his resolve harden. "Be reasonable, John," Brock said, his hand moving casually toward his blaster. "If you've got nothing to hide, there's no problem." "This is my property," John repeated. "I decide who comes and goes. Now get back on your horses and leave." For a moment, it seemed Brock might escalate the confrontation. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled, a cold expression that didn't reach his eyes. "Fine. Have it your way for now." He mounted his horse again. "But we'll be watching, and if there are aliens here, we'll find them, for the safety of the village." The men rode away, leaving John standing in the yard, his heart hammering in his chest. Only when the dust from their horses had settled did he open the cellar and motion for Sina and her children to emerge. "They suspect," Sina said quietly, holding her children close. John nodded grimly. "Yes, you may not be safe here much longer." That evening, as the children slept in the shed, Sina sat by the window, staring at the star-filled sky. John found himself watching her, noticing how the moonlight reflected off her gray skin, highlighting the subtle patterns that seemed to shift with her emotions. "Those stars," she said without turning. "One of them is where I was born, but I don't know which one anymore." John sat across from her. "Why did you come here? Earth isn't exactly welcoming to your kind." Sina's gaze remained on the sky. "I was a slave," she said, her voice so low John had to lean forward to hear. "Taken when my home world was conquered, before your Earth was ever involved in the war. When the peace came, some slaves were freed, but many of us were sold to private owners to avoid reparations." She finally looked at him, her yellow eyes reflecting starlight. "I escaped with my children from a mining colony. We stole a small transport, crashed in the wilderness north of here. We've been walking for weeks, hiding from settlements, scavenging food." Her voice caught. "My children were starving. I had to risk approaching someone." "Why me?" John asked. A small, sad smile touched her lips. "Your farm was isolated, and when I watched you working alone in the fields, you seemed kind, or at least not cruel." John absorbed her words, feeling a complex mix of emotions. "Those men will come back," he said finally, "with more people. They won't stop until they find you." "We will leave tomorrow," Sina said, resignation in her voice. "You've done enough, risked enough." "No," John found himself saying. "Not yet." He stood up, pacing the small room. "We have the harvest coming. The fields need tending. And the children." He trailed off, thinking of Mira and Leo, how they had started to look less frightened, how they had begun to play in the yard when they thought no one was watching. "Stay until after the harvest," he said finally. "Help me bring in the wheat. Then—" He shrugged, not wanting to think beyond that point. Sina studied him, confusion evident in her expression. "Why would you risk this for us?" John had no clear answer, only a certainty that he couldn't send them away. "Not yet." "Just stay," he said gruffly. "But be more careful. No working in the open fields. Stay close to the house where you can hide quickly." The following weeks settled into a new routine. Sina worked mainly in the barn and around the house, venturing into the fields only at dusk or dawn, when visibility from the road was poor. The children remained hidden whenever strangers approached, which happened with increasing frequency, riders with red scarves making a point of passing by the farm, watching. Despite the tension, John found himself growing accustomed to the presence of Sina and her children. Mira, the older child, began helping with small tasks, her delicate fingers particularly suited to separating seeds. Leo, still young enough to require afternoon naps, would sit for hours watching the chickens, giving each one a name in his native language that John couldn't pronounce. Sina continued to improve her baking skills, experimenting with earth ingredients. One evening, she presented John with a loaf that looked almost identical to the ones sold in the village. "Taste," she urged, a hint of pride in her voice. John broke the bread, steam rising from the soft interior. The flavor was perfect, better, even, than what he'd had in town. "It's good," he acknowledged. "Very good." Sina's face lit up with a genuine smile, the luminescent patterns on her skin brightening in response. John found himself smiling back, a rare expression that felt strange on his face. "Tomorrow I will try adding herbs," she declared, already planning her next attempt. That night, a storm gathered on the horizon, the first promise of rain after weeks of drought. John stood on the porch, watching lightning flash in the distance, counting the seconds until thunder followed. "Is it coming this way?" Sina asked, joining him outside. John nodded. "Feels like it. We should secure the barn and the weak sections of the wheat field. If it hits hard, we could lose part of the crop." They worked by lantern light, reinforcing the barn doors, checking the irrigation channels to ensure they could handle sudden water flow without flooding. The air grew heavy with electricity, making the hairs on John's arms stand on end. "The children are afraid," Sina said as they finished their preparations. "They've never seen an earth storm." "Bring them into the house," John said. "They can stay in the main room tonight." The storm hit just before midnight, rain lashing against the windows in sheets, driven by howling wind. Thunder crashed overhead, shaking the timbers of the old farmhouse. Mira and Leo huddled together on a pallet by the hearth, their eyes wide with fear at each booming thunderclap. John tried to reassure them. "It's just noise," he explained. "The lightning hits the ground far away, and we hear it later as thunder." "On our world," Sina told him quietly, "storms bring acid rain that burns through shelter. They're right to be afraid." John considered this. "Wait here," he said, disappearing into his bedroom. He returned with a small wooden box, carved with intricate patterns. Opening it revealed a mechanism of gears and springs, a music box, one of the few possessions he'd kept from his wife. He wound it carefully and set it on the table. A gentle melody filled the room, somehow audible even over the storm's rage. The children's attention immediately fixed on the box, their fear momentarily forgotten. "My daughter used to be afraid of storms too," John said, the words coming unbidden. It was the first time he'd mentioned his family to Sina. Sina's gaze softened. "You had a child?" John nodded, not trusting himself to speak further. He didn't need to. Something in Sina's expression told him she understood the past tense, the loss implied in his words. The storm continued through the night, but inside the house, the four of them found a moment of peace in the music box's melody, repeated over and over, until the children finally fell asleep. Dawn revealed the storm's impact. Parts of the wheat field lay flattened by the wind, and a section of the barn roof had been damaged. But the greatest concern came when John inspected the western field, where the ground sloped toward a natural depression. "The water's pooling here," he told Sina, who had accompanied him despite his warnings to stay near the house. "If it keeps raining, this whole section could flood, and we'd lose at least a quarter of the crop." Sina surveyed the area, her alien eyes perhaps seeing details John missed. "We need to dig channels," she said. "Direct the water away from the wheat." John shook his head. "There's too much ground to cover. I don't have the equipment." "Then we use what we have," Sina insisted. "Show me where the water should go instead." They spent the morning digging rudimentary drainage channels with the limited tools available: shovels, hose, even their hands when necessary. The work was exhausting, the ground alternating between muddy soup and clay-like resistance. By midday, they had created several crude ditches leading away from the wheat field toward a rocky area that could absorb the runoff. "It might be enough," John said, straightening his aching back, "if the rain holds off." But the clouds gathering on the horizon suggested otherwise. By evening, the storm had regrouped, bringing even heavier rainfall than before. John and Sina watched from the porch as water began to accumulate faster than their makeshift channels could drain it. "The wheat will drown," John said, a note of defeat in his voice. After weeks of drought, it was bitterly ironic to lose the crop to too much water. Sina stared at the field, her expression resolute. "Not if we keep digging." Before John could respond, she had grabbed a shovel and was heading toward the field, the rain immediately soaking her clothing. John hesitated only a moment before following, snatching up his own tools. They worked in the downpour, deepening the channels, creating new ones where water found unexpected paths. The ground turned to mud beneath their feet, making every step treacherous. Several times, John nearly fell, only to feel Sina's strong hand steadying him. Lightning split the sky directly overhead, followed instantly by deafening thunder. John shouted at Sina to return to the house. The metal tools they carried made them perfect lightning targets, but his voice was lost in the storm's roar. As night fell, they continued by lantern light, their bodies caked in mud, clothes plastered to skin. John's muscles screamed in protest, but the sight of water beginning to flow more freely through their expanded channels gave him the strength to continue. It was near midnight when disaster struck. A section of the field's edge, weakened by their digging and the persistent rain, suddenly collapsed. A wall of mud and water surged toward them, catching Sina in its path. John watched in horror as she disappeared beneath the muddy torrent. Without thinking, he dropped his shovel and dove after her, fighting against the current. His hands found her arm, then her shoulder. With strength born of desperation, he pulled her from the mud's grip, dragging them both to higher ground. Sina coughed, spitting out mud, her luminescent markings dimmed by exhaustion. "The field," she gasped. "We have to finish." "No," John said firmly. "We've done enough. The main channels are working. We go back now." He helped her to her feet, supporting her weight as they trudged back to the house. The children, awakened by the storm's violence, cried out at the sight of their mud-covered mother. John helped Sina to a chair while retrieving clean cloths and their precious store of fresh water. As he gently wiped mud from a cut on Sina's forehead, he realized how close they had come to tragedy. "Why?" he asked quietly. "Why risk yourself for my field?" Sina's eyes met his, a depth of emotion in them he hadn't seen before. "You gave my children food when they were starving. You gave us shelter when we had none." Her voice strengthened. "This farm is your life. I couldn't let you lose it." Something shifted between them in that moment. A recognition, perhaps, of a bond formed through shared struggle. John found himself unable to respond with words, settling instead for a nod that somehow conveyed his gratitude. The storm finally abated by morning, giving way to brilliant sunshine that steamed the saturated ground. John surveyed the damage from the porch, expecting the worst. But to his amazement, most of the wheat field remained intact. Their desperate channel digging had succeeded in directing the worst of the floodwater away from the crop. "We saved it," he told Sina, who joined him outside despite her obvious exhaustion. "Most of it, anyway." She smiled, the expression transforming her alien features into something John found unexpectedly beautiful. Then it was worth the mud. They were still standing there, surveying their handiwork, when the sound of approaching horses reached them. John's stomach tightened as he recognized the red scarves of Brock's security committee. At least a dozen riders this time. "Get inside," he urged Sina. "Take the children to the cellar." But it was too late. The riders had already spotted them, and Brock's voice rang out. "There she is! The alien!" John stepped in front of Sina as the riders approached, his hands clenched into fists. "This is my land!" he shouted. "You're trespassing." Brock dismounted, followed by his companions. "Step aside, John. We're taking the alien into custody, for the village's protection." "She's done nothing wrong," John argued. "She has children." "Alien offspring," one of the committee members spat. "Even more dangerous. They grow up hating humans." Brock advanced, his hand on his blaster. "Last chance to stand down, John. Don't make us treat you as a collaborator." The moment stretched taut as wire. John could feel Sina trembling behind him, not from fear for herself, he suspected, but for her children watching from the window. "If you want her," John said slowly, "you'll have to go through me." Brock's expression hardened. "So be it." He signaled to his men, who began to spread out, clearly intending to surround the house. But before they could complete the maneuver, A new voice called out.
"Stop this, all of you!"
Old Merrick rode into the yard, his ancient horse breathing heavily from the journey. Behind him came several other villagers, including Martha from the general store. "What are you doing here, old man?" Brock demanded. "This is committee business." "I'm making it everyone's business," Merrick replied, dismounting with difficulty. "We came to see the miracle for ourselves." "What miracle?" John asked, confused. Martha stepped forward. "Word spreading through the village. Every farm that got hit by the storm lost at least half their crop, except yours." She looked past John to Sina. "They say you two worked through the night in the worst of the storm, digging channels by hand to save the wheat." Murmurs spread through the gathered villagers. John noticed several of them staring at Sina with expressions of curiosity rather than hostility. "Is it true?" Merrick asked, addressing Sina directly, perhaps the first time any villager had done so. "Did you help save the crop?" Sina hesitated, then stepped forward to stand beside John rather than behind him. "We worked together," she said simply. "The farm is important to John, so it became important to me." A woman John recognized as the baker's wife pushed through the crowd. "My husband says we'll have half the usual flour this season because of the storm damage. If this farm's wheat survived." She left the implication hanging. Merrick turned to face Brock and his committee. "Look around you, man. This farm might help feed the village this winter. And you want to drive away the person who helped save it?" Brock's face flushed with anger. "She's an alien. They can't be trusted." "Seems to me," Martha said loudly, "that she's proven herself more trustworthy than some humans I could name. Working all night in a storm to save a crop that isn't even hers, while your committee was hiding indoors." The mood of the crowd was shifting palpably. Several of Brock's own men looked uncomfortable, avoiding their leader's gaze. "The treaty says they have rights," Merrick reminded everyone. "And this one has earned our respect, at the very least." Brock looked around, realizing he was losing support. With a disgusted sound, he remounted his horse. "This isn't over," he warned, wheeling his animal around. "The committee will be watching." As Brock and his most loyal followers rode away, an uncomfortable silence fell over the remaining villagers. John stood tensely, uncertain what would happen next. It was Martha who broke the tension, stepping forward with a bundle in her arms. "Thought you might need some dry clothes," she said, offering the package to Sina. "And there's soap, too. Good for mud." Sina accepted the gift with visible surprise. "Thank you," she said softly. One by one, other villagers came forward with small offerings: a loaf of bread, a jar of preserved fruit, a handful of candles. Simple gifts, but each represented a tremendous shift in attitude. Merrick was the last to approach. He studied Sina thoughtfully before speaking. "I lost my son in the war," he said bluntly. "Thought I'd hate your kind forever. Maybe part of me still does." He paused. "But you saved this wheat when you could have run and hidden. That counts for something." With that, he tipped his hat to John and returned to his horse. The other villagers gradually followed suit, leaving John and Sina standing in the yard, surrounded by their unexpected gifts. "What just happened?" Sina asked, bewildered. John looked at the retreating figures, then at the mud-caked field where they had labored through the night. "I think," he said slowly, "you just became a person to them, not just an alien." The days following the storm brought a strange new reality. Villagers who had previously avoided John's farm now found reasons to visit, bringing small gifts, offering help with repairs, or simply coming to see the alien who saved the wheat. Some still showed discomfort around Sina, but outright hostility had largely been replaced by cautious curiosity. Mira and Leo, initially terrified by the influx of humans, gradually emerged from hiding, especially when a family brought children of similar age. The universal language of play transcended species differences, and soon the alien children were included in games of tag and hide-and-seek around the farmyard. Sina herself became something of a local sensation when word spread of her baking skills. The village baker, initially skeptical, tried one of her herb loaves and immediately offered to buy any surplus she produced. For the first time, Sina had income of her own, small, but symbolically significant. As the wheat ripened to harvest readiness, John faced a practical problem. His farm was too large for one person to harvest efficiently, but hiring help from the village had always been difficult due to his reputation as a recluse. This year, however, neighbors appeared with scythes and baskets, offering assistance. "Got to protect our winter bread supply," one farmer joked. But the underlying message was clear. Sina's efforts during the storm had earned community support. The harvest proceeded more smoothly than any in John's memory. Even Brock and his red-scarved committee kept their distance, their influence diminished by public opinion swinging against them. By the time the last sheaves were gathered, John's granary was fuller than it had been in years. It was during the final day of harvest that John made a decision he'd been contemplating for weeks. That evening, after the last of the helpers had departed and the children were asleep in what had become their room in the main house, he asked Sina to join him on the porch. The night was clear, stars shimmering above like scattered diamonds. John retrieved a document from his pocket, a land deed he had drawn up with Merrick's help. "This is for you," he said, handing it to Sina. "It's the deed to the eastern field and the small cottage that stands there. It needs repairs, but it's solid enough." Sina stared at the document, then at John, confusion evident in her expression. "I don't understand." "It's yours," John explained. "Your own land. No one can force you to leave it, not legally. You and your children will have a permanent home here." Sina's luminescent markings pulsed with emotion as she carefully took the deed.
Why would you do this for us?
John looked out over the darkened fields. Struggling to articulate feelings, he barely understood himself. "After my wife and daughter died, I thought I'd be alone forever. I preferred it that way." He paused. "But having you and the children here, it's brought something back. Something I thought was gone." Sina's hand found his, her gray fingers intertwining with his weathered ones. "On my world, we have a saying, the heart grows new chambers when old ones collapse. Perhaps this is what has happened to both of us." They sat in companionable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead. John felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in years. Whatever challenges lay ahead, and there would be many in a world still healing from war, they would face them together. A year passed, marked by the rhythms of planting and harvest, growth and dormancy. The small cottage on the eastern field had been transformed by Sina's care into a proper home, though she and the children spent as much time in John's house as their own. The division of property was largely symbolic. In practice, they operated as a single extended family. Mira and Leo attended the village school now, the first alien children to do so. There had been resistance initially, but the children's quick minds and eager curiosity won over even skeptical teachers. They returned home each day bubbling with new knowledge, teaching John and Sina as much as they themselves were learning. Sina's baking had evolved into a small business, her unique bread recipes incorporating alien flavoring techniques, creating demand beyond the local village. John expanded the wheat fields to accommodate the increased production, hiring seasonal help for the first time in a decade. The red-scarved security committee had eventually disbanded, its purpose obsolete as relations between humans and the few alien settlers in the region normalized. Brock still scowled when he encountered Sina in the village, but direct confrontation had ceased. On the anniversary of the Great Storm, the village held its traditional harvest festival. For the first time, John attended, accompanied by Sina and the children. They brought loaves of special festival bread, decorated with intricate patterns that mimicked Sina's luminescent markings. As they set up their booth in the village square, Martha approached with a formal-looking document. "The village council voted last night," she announced. "Sina is officially recognized as a citizen of our community, with all rights and protections thereof." She handed the certificate to Sina with a smile. "Overdue, if you ask me." The festival proceeded with music, dancing, and feasting. John watched as Mira and Leo played with human children, their differences all but forgotten in the joy of celebration. Merrick joined him, observing the scene with satisfaction. "Never thought I'd see the day," the old miller admitted. "Aliens and humans breaking bread together." "People change," John replied, "when they allow themselves to." As evening approached, lanterns were lit throughout the square, casting a warm glow over the festivities. Sina found John at the edge of the crowd, her yellow eyes reflecting the dancing lights. "Dance with me?" she asked, extending her hand. John hesitated. He hadn't danced since before his wife's death, but something in Sina's expression gave him courage. He took her hand, allowing her to lead him into the circle of dancers. Their movements were awkward at first, two beings from different worlds trying to find common rhythm. But gradually, they synchronized, turning and stepping in harmony as the music swelled around them. From the edge of the square, Mira and Leo watched their mother and John with identical expressions of delight. Martha, standing nearby, leaned down to their level. "Your mother and John make quite a pair," she observed. Leo nodded solemnly. "John is our family now?" "He says so." Martha smiled. "Yes, I believe he is." As the dance ended, John and Sina remained in the circle, their hands still joined. Above them, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, the same stars that had witnessed Sina's desperate arrival a year ago. Now, bearing witness to something entirely new. A family forged not through birth or blood, but through compassion, labor, and love. Later that night, as they walked home along the starlit road, Sina spoke softly. "My children now have a home. I have a place in this world." She gazed up at John, her luminescent markings glowing gently in the darkness. "All because you opened your door that night." John thought about how a single moment of compassion had cascaded into transformations none of them could have imagined. His solitary existence had given way to a life rich with connection, to Sina, to the children, even to the community he had long avoided. "We saved each other," he replied simply. As they crested the hill, their farm came into view, the main house, the cottage, the fields stretching silver in the moonlight. No longer just a place of work and survival, but a true home. The drought would return someday. There would be other storms, other challenges, but they would face them together. This unlikely family created across the stars, bound by something stronger than species or origin. The universal truth that compassion, once given room to grow, could transform even the harshest landscape into fertile ground. On the porch of the farmhouse, John and Sina stood for a moment, watching Mira and Leo chase fireflies in the yard. The scene before them, so ordinary, yet so extraordinary, was the greatest harvest of all. Proof that even in a world scarred by war, new beginnings were not only possible, but inevitable, as natural as wheat sprouting from once barren earth.